Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
The trial, United States of America versus Sean Diddy Combs.
She says Diddy raped her and assaulted her. She said that telling him no was not an option.
Shocking allegations against one of the most famous men in the world.
As we proceed to give you what you need.
A federal RICO case that could send Sean Diddy Combs away for life.
He's going to fight this to the end. He's innocent.
A Street Soldiers on location special from federal court. Diddy on trial, the fight of his life. I'm so glad you're joining us for this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. We're bringing this to you from our street side pop-up studio outside federal court. It has been a week of incredible twists and turns and ups and downs, and we've been here for all of it. Let's take a look at what went down. A lot happened over the weekend before the doors of this courthouse even opened this morning. Diddy's defense team made a motion for a mistrial, and social media went into a feverish frenzy of speculation about the identity of the witness on the stand, known under the pseudonym Jane. Now, Combs' sons arrived for court this morning in a continuing show of support for their father, who's facing a tough battle with the RICO sex trafficking charges, which could keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Now, the first order of business this morning for Judge Arun Subramanian was the mistrial motion made by the defense on Saturday. They claim prosecutors knew the testimony of alleged balcony dangle victim Brianna Bongalin was false. The judge said he will await the prosecution response and decide on the mistrial request tomorrow. Back on the stand was Jane, her pseudonym, who testified about her growing frustration with hotel nights, her term for the freak-offs involving her and male sex workers and Diddy. Diddy's ex-girlfriend for hire, going under the pseudonym Jane, was on the hot seat today under cross-examination, providing more details about her business and sex relationship with Diddy, and really getting into her jealousy that Diddy was showing a lot of attention and going public with rapper Young Miami, treating her more like a secret side chick than a real girlfriend. Now, Mrs. Janice Combs was leaving court this afternoon with 3 of Combs' sons after sitting through all of this testimony today. Now, for the first time in this trial, which is in its 5th week, there's an issue with the juror. Prosecutors asking the judge to dismiss a juror they say appeared to exhibit a lack of candor in the process of this entire trial. Now, translation, that means that the juror was not honest about something that the prosecution considers essential to this case. The judge said that he will make that decision tomorrow. First, let's talk about this jury controversy. The prosecutors want juror number 6 kicked off the jury, but we still don't know why. So first thing this morning, the judge met privately with both sides. Then they came out and said that he would postpone a decision until tomorrow. So there's no change for the jury for now. Now, Diddy's sons came to court again this morning, as they have every day this week, to support their father, who's pleaded not guilty to RICO sex trafficking and other charges. There's a lot to unpack. Let's get right to the key issues. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Philip Hamilton. He's tried many federal court cases. A lot of people are saying on social media and just on the streets that this is a he said, she said type of case, and there's also problems with witness credibility. There's some conflicting testimony that's starting to emerge. How important are the witnesses to this?
I mean, the witnesses are critical, both to the prosecution's case, of course, because without them, they have a paper case, right? So their case has to be made based off of witness testimony. But of course, the defense has every incentive and every objective to try to destroy that testimony, be it by showing inconsistencies, be it by showing the fact that it just practically couldn't have happened the way in which they're saying that certain acts and conduct occurred. So at the end of the day, without the witnesses, you don't have a case, Lisa.
Now, in terms of the prosecution, the charges, what exactly do they have to prove? Because people are saying this isn't sex trafficking, these are ex-girlfriends that he was giving money to.
Right. And I think it's important to focus in on that point in terms of what is the case that the government has brought against Sean Diddy Combs. And I think, to be very clear and helpful for all the viewers, this case is not solely about sex trafficking, right? There are some standalone counts of sex trafficking on the indictment where he's accused of doing as much, but he's also charged with the RICO. He's also charged with essentially interstate prostitution, right? And so at the end of the day, I think what's important to note he could beat the sex trafficking charges, even based upon what everyone's saying and that these women voluntarily put themselves in these situations. They wanted the limelight, they wanted the stardom, they wanted what they thought could come from Sean Diddy Combs, and then when it didn't come, whatever they had voluntarily entered into, now all of a sudden is sex trafficking, right? That's a lot of what you have going out just kind of in the lay public, or what people are discussing about this matter. But here's the thing. Even if the jury were to buy that exact analysis and he were to beat the sex trafficking charges, he still has to beat the RICO. He still has to beat the interstate prostitution charges. The government has essentially thrown the kitchen sink at him. And when we're hearing all of these, all of this testimony, I should say, regarding Kid Cudi in the car, regarding kidnappings, regarding balconies and people being hung over them, all of this superfluous stuff, the reason why you're hearing about that is because, again, this case is about more than sex trafficking. What they're saying is that Sean Diddy Combs, via Bad Boy, essentially ran a criminal enterprise. No different than if it were BMF, no different than if it were the Bloods, no different if it were the Mafia. At the end of the day, what they're essentially saying is that P. Diddy, all of his assistants and all of his handlers were essentially running an organization that was set for the purpose of protecting him to be able to satiate whatever celebrity-oriented needs he had, whether they're the freak-offs or whatever you want to call them, and that because that enterprise was put together to protect him but also help enable him, at the end of the day, that was an enterprise that committed criminal predicate acts, be it the car blowing up, all the other stuff that we've heard about that the government has put forth, and that's how they're trying to convict him on the RICO charge, right? Like, that is separate and apart from the sex trafficking, even though one of the predicate acts for the RICO is sex trafficking, right? That his enterprise was committing acts of sex trafficking, that they were committing acts of kidnapping, arson, all of these other things to try to prove their case. So it's so much more than the sex trafficking, even though the sex trafficking is a very big part of the case and also a weighty one, because you have to remember that's the one that carries the 15-year mandatory minimum.
Does it concern you, though, as a defense attorney? And what people are saying on the streets to me is the only police report in the whole thing was Kid Cudi calling the LAPD.
Right.
There's no forensic evidence. There's no rape kits. There's no ER room visits, things that you would have in any other type of case. Does that concern you?
I mean, as a defense attorney, I'm just going to be frank, I would love that if I'm in this situation of having to defend my client and try to get my client out of these charges, which, as I said, could potentially have a floor of 15 years, but a max of life. And so to the extent that you have a lot of that evidence that doesn't exist, to the extent that you're able to point that out to the jury, where all are these reports that you would expect to see if, in fact, a lot of this was going on, if these people were being coerced, if they weren't voluntarily into it? Why didn't they run to the police? Why didn't they run to the hospital and say that they had been sexually assaulted and we would see a rape kit? These kinds of things. As a defense attorney, you're pointing that out left and right. From the start of the case, which is exactly what happened with the defense in their opening, all the way through your cross-examinations, all the way until the end in summation, which we know we'll be hearing. So as a defense attorney, you love to be in that situation.
Now, what about, finally, some of the witnesses have testified that they were given immunity for their testimony. Does that mean they can lie on the witness stand without consequences or with impunity?
No, they can't lie, but to the extent that they end up testifying to acts and conduct that could otherwise, but for that immunity agreement, have them arrested or have them sitting in here on a conspiracy indictment or some other kind of RICO racketeering type of indictment, they have immunity to be able to say whatever they are saying is the truth without having to worry about, could this come back on me? And then I end up in prison for talking about potentially some illegal conduct that I participated in. But if they get on the stand and lie, what that immediately does, and what the government is always very clear about, is it undercuts your immunity agreement. They'll snatch that immunity away, and then you could be in a situation where you're sitting in front of a judge and a jury fighting for your life.
What about the defense team? What do they have to do in order to score a big win here?
I think what they have to do is continue, both for the purposes of the sex trafficking, to make it clear, as they've been trying to do from the inception of the case, that this is all voluntary conduct from these witnesses with Diddy. And that though he may not be what we would say, engaging in normal behavior, or these may be some things that are a little bit outside the lines or just a little bit extraordinary or just weird, so to speak, that at the end of the day, that doesn't make out a RICO, that doesn't make out a criminal enterprise, that doesn't make out sex trafficking, that just makes out a man that maybe isn't the best man, isn't a perfect man, and may in fact be guilty of certain lower level domestic violence types of offenses or other types of crimes that don't constitute sex trafficking and certainly don't constitute a RICO criminal enterprise.
There's so much more to this. Don't go away.
A witness cannot keep themselves composed. It really affects their credibility. And then it's much easier to kind of figure out the holes in their storyline. And, you know, this is why there's such a big question of if Diddy's going to testify or not.
Welcome back to this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Ultimately, Sean Diddy Combs' fate will be decided by the jury. But who are they? Joining me now is trial consultant Faye Honig. Faye, the judge scolded Diddy for making gestures and staring, what he said was staring at the jury. How significant is that?
So this just shows us again that the jury watches everything that's going on. So he's fighting for his life on trial. So he's human, right? So it's not about him not reacting or not taking notes or not nodding along, but this was specifically about him looking at the jury and vigorously nodding. So the judge doesn't want any indication that he's trying to influence the jury or suggest anything. And this could actually offend the jury, especially in a case when the prosecution is trying to make the claim that he's coercive and controlling.
And then what about the prosecution? Like, what jurors might be helpful to them, would you say?
Yeah, so
or can you tell?
Of course. So there's it's actually more important to look for the jurors that could be bad for you because, of course, going back a couple of weeks, it's deselection, right? So they're really going to be looking out for the danger jurors. So there's a couple of jurors that I think the prosecution should be worried about. There are a bunch of logical, analytical jurors. There's an investment banker, there's a JP Morgan worker, there's a scientist with a PhD in molecular biology. These are the types of jurors that are really going to be looking analytically at the evidence. They're going to be looking at jury instructions very closely, and they're really going to be seeing if the government's proven the burden.
And then in terms of the defense, who would be most hurtful to the defense?
So the defense also has some potential killers. So there's a lot of social workers on this jury. There's caregivers, there's sympathetic people. So these are the types of jurors that are going to be really taking the evidence fully on. They're not going to shy away from the emotional testimony. And those jurors could really sway the rest of them.
And then in terms of this particular group, this group of jurors, give us an idea of who's actually on the jury.
So it's actually quite a diverse jury, which we tend to see in these longer cases in SDNY because they're pulling from multiple counties. So the jury is more male, it's older, and it's more higher educated, but you're also getting a very diverse group of people.
And then what about what some people are calling a cultural disconnect? Because Diddy was in a very fast lane lifestyle, the celebrity lifestyle, this music industry where it's much, much different than people who are working a 9 to 5 and have a much more typical standard type of lifestyle. How important is that in this case to the jurors?
So it's pretty interesting, and I think this brings me back to kind of what I would call the wild card of the jury. There's one juror on there that is an actor and a masseuse. So it's very interesting he's on, and he's truly a wild card because as an actor, he could really understand kind of where Diddy's coming from, that these accusers may try to take advantage of him as much as they claim he was taking advantage of them. But at the same time, being a masseuse, he could be totally desensitized, and he could bring in kind of individual knowledge and end up being a leader as well.
And then in terms of the jury reaction, very hard for us to see what their faces, what kind of reactions they're making, whether they're taking notes or not taking notes. But what do you think are the things that we should be watching for with the jury?
So
are there anything?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I think it's important to see how the jury is reacting, but it's also not the most important thing. So of course it's important if the jury is, leaning forward, engaging, taking a lot of notes. If they've kind of been sitting back and then a witness comes on and they're furiously taking notes, that's important. But at the same time, in our focus groups and in trials that we've seen, you get the jurors that are really paying attention and then go the complete opposite way, or the jurors that aren't taking notes at all and then end up being the leaders. So I think you have to be a little bit cautious when you're looking at how the jury is actually reacting.
What about the emotional outburst? For example, one of the witnesses, the witness known as Jane, she snapped back at Jenny Garagos during cross-examination and just really kind of lost her cool. And I think she realized it because she said, Your Honor, I need a break.
Yeah.
And the judge, they immediately broke. How does the jury see that type of thing?
So that goes more towards credibility in my mind. If a witness cannot keep themselves composed, it really affects their credibility. And then it's much easier to kind of figure out the holes in their storyline. And, this is why there's such a big question of if Diddy's going to testify or not, because it could really easily, quickly affect his credibility.
And the credibility of the witnesses has also come under fire and under question by some of the court watchers and some of the lawyers who are watching this case. How important is the witness credibility?
It's everything. I mean, they're what the prosecution is putting their whole case on. To talk about these kind of coercive control and the psychological manipulation, you have to go right to the source, right? So if someone who's claiming that Diddy had psychological manipulation and control over them, but is, mincing their words or is talking about how many drugs they used to do and doesn't remember, is getting the timeline wrong, I mean, that's the whole prosecution's case.
We've got more for you after this.
There has been no shortage of oohs, ahs, and oh my gods since the onset of this trial.
Welcome back to this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Celebrity lifestyles are front and center in this case. Let's find out more about them from New York Post lifestyle reporter Asia Grace.
What is it about this Diddy trial that has us all so fascinated?
Lisa, there has been no shortage of oohs, ahs, and oh my gods since the onset of this trial. It's an international spectacle fit for the international superstar that Diddy once was. This trial has really garnered the attention very similar to that of O.J. Simpson in the 90s. However, now we have our fingertips right there at the World Wide Web, and we can talk and say as much as we'd like. And let me tell you, these TikTok talkers, these keyboard critics, they are literally commentating on every single aspect of this very high-profile case. For years, people watched Diddy's star rise, and there were whispers and there were rumors, and now that we're here, those same people are gathering to watch and see whether or not it would actually fall.
What about the social media frenzy?
Oh, you cannot open TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter without being slapped in the face with some new splashy, salacious headliner update. Each headliner update more salacious than the last. And social media, we can all agree it can be a blessing and a curse, especially in situations like this. A blessing in that it kind of serves as like an information hub. So we're feeling like we're in the room with you all and the prosecutors, the defense, Diddy himself. But it also serves as a curse because a lot of social media sleuths, these wannabes, they dig up information, trying to go viral, and then some of that information is put out and it's either false or prematurely released, right, or it's privileged information. So, as a social media society, we do have to, take certain things with a grain of salt. We all want to spill the tea and receive the tea, but we all have a responsibility to make sure our sources are credible and that, we're just watching for the truth.
And then you've watched through hip hop, through his evolution, his, the stardom and the rise and everything like that. But now it seems like hip hop has amnesia about what a trailblazer he really was.
It's hard to deny that Diddy absolutely solidified his spot on the hip hop Mount Everest, or Mount Rushmore, I should say. And his reach was far exceeded hip hop. He was in a little bit of everything, in pop culture, in fashion, in politics, you name it. But now the glitterati has absolutely turned their back. They're giving him the cold shoulder. The same people that were in the lap of luxury with him, enjoying those famous Diddy parties and the names that he made household names, the doors he opened, nearly none of those people with status are really speaking up in his defense. And we saw this kind of very quick temperature change when it was R. Kelly, when it was Bill Cosby, when it was Harvey Weinstein. But what I find interesting about Diddy is during his reign as this music mogul, fashion icon, social playboy, all of that, he really did want to be a little away from his peers, in a class by himself. And now he may be fighting this case all by himself, ironically.
There's also this whole narrative about these alleged victims and the complexity of their stories and their circumstances. What about that?
Well, because we have so much in the way of connection to the case, because we can see the transcripts, we're getting different perspectives from influencers and reporters, a lot of people are making early judgments. When they hear victims or witnesses say, I don't know, I can't remember, then things become, questionable. Well, did it really happen? And I don't know if that's a strategy as far as the defense is concerned, but I do know that at the end of the day, there has been so many things that have come out from this case, and people online are, whether it's the no Diddy trend or the free Diddy trend, whatever side of the fence you're on, I think everyone is very invested in knowing who they've held on this pedestal, who they've supported all these years. Is he the man behind the mask, the monster behind the mask that people are alleging, or is he really just being wrongfully accused?
What about the whole issue of his family? Because his mother's been in court pretty much almost every single day. The kids show up when they can. What about that?
Well, I do believe that the family initially had come out to support. They wanted to show their faces to show that they love him. But after some of the testimony, I do understand that it seems to be like the family is not so much the focus. I don't know if that was initially a sympathy ploy from his team, hoping to show that he's a human. He's not just some, faceless, nameless, almighty somebody, but he's actually a father, a son, a friend. However, because of the testimony and the alleged sexual abuse, alleged drug use, and alleged violence, I don't know that even the family aspect of his defense is really pushing the needle. Right now, things are so up in the air, and everyone's just so locked in because they're so surprised at what they're learning throughout this trial.
We'll be right back after this. Thanks for joining us for the special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy trial. You can watch it again and share it on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page. Remember, use your mind as your best weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.